I shot up in bed, my lungs burning as if I'd just broken the surface of deep water after being held under for far too long. For a disorienting second, I was convinced I was still trapped in that blinding white hospital room. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the only thing keeping me tethered to a world I no longer wanted to be part of. But this wasn't the hospital. This was my childhood bedroom. The familiar are faded lavender walls I'd begged my mother to paint when I was 12. The messy desk piled high with textbooks I'd long since graduated from. And my phone on the nightstand, flashing a date that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. June 10th. 3 years ago. Before the accident. Before Leo. Before everything shattered into a million pieces I'd spent the last year of my life fruitlessly trying to glue back together. Only to watch them slip through my fingers again and again. I rely had time to process the thumping of my own heart before the door burst opened. Emma! Are you still in bed? My mother's voice. Tight with that particular our brand of pre-Gala anxiety. She'd perfected over the years, sliced through the haze like a knife. The CAR will be here in an hour. And I need you to keep an eye on Chloe for me tonight. You know how nervous she gets at these things. Chloe. My stepsister. The girl who had smiled so sweetly at me across the dinner table while meticulously dismantling everything I read about, one whispered rumor at a time. The girl who in my previous timeline had spilled red wine down my white dress at this very gala, blamed my clumsiness, and then accepted the condolences of half the room while I retreated to the bathroom to cry mascaras into a scratchy paper towel. The girl who, 2 weeks after that night, walked into the kitchen with my boyfriend's arms slung possessively around her shoulders. His lips still wet from the kiss she'd just given him. Mom, I said, my voice hoarse, like I'd been screaming for hours. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold against my bare feet, grounding me in a way that felt almost hysterically funny. Chloe is a big girl. I'm sure she can handle her own dress. My mother blinked, caught completely off guard by my tone. I'd always been the accommodating one, the peacekeeper. The one who smoothed over Chloe's little dramas with a smile and a gentle word. Emma, don't be difficult. It's a big night for the Sterling Foundation. Your father worked so hard to get this invitation for us. A familiar knot of resentment tightened in my chest, so physical it almost hurt to breathe. Of course. My stepfather, Richard Sterling, the benevolent patron of the ARTS, the man who had welcomed me into his home, and made sure I never forgot whose name was on the deed. He'd worked hard to get us invited. Not me. Not my mother. I'll be ready in 20 minutes, I said, my voice flat as my mother hovered in the doorway, still looking vaguely disturbed by my uncharacteristic bluntness. I caught a glimpse of Chloe passing by in the hallway. My stepsister was already fully done up. Hair in glossy Hollywood waves, makeup flawless, and a backless crimson dress that practically screamed, "Look at me." Her face was a mask of practiced sweetness, her smile fixed in place like she was posing for an invisible camera. It was a face I knew better than anyone. The slight tilt of her chin, the coy way her eyes root to make sure someone was watching. She was in her element. The social butterfly, the darling of the Sterling name. The girl who had everything except, I noticed with a jolt of pure, icy vindication. She hadn't fixed the zipper on her dress, it was gaping open at the top. About 3 inches of exposed skin and the metallic teeth of the closure peeking out from beneath the crimson fabric. A tiny embarrassing oversight. The kind of thing you'd normally whisper to a friend in the bathroom. The kind of thing I would have dashed over to fix without a second thought, because that was who I was. The fixer. The supporter. The girl who made sure everyone else looked perfect while she faded into the background. Well, that girl had died in that hospital bed, alone, with no one but the beeping machines to keep her company. I watched Chloe glide down the hallway, oblivious to her wardrobe malfunction, her heels clicking a confident rhythm on the hardwood floor, and I made a conscious decision. I didn't say a word. I didn't call out. I didn't run after her with a safety pin and a reassuring smile. I turned back to my closet, pulled out a simple black dress I'd bought on sale months ago, and slipped it on with mechanical precision. The fabric was plain, forgettable. Perfect. The drive to the Grand Astor Hotel was a blur of my mother's nervous chatter and Chloe's exaggerated sighs. She was doing that thing where she pretended to be overwhelmed by the enormity of the event, her hand fluttering to her chest like she was about to faint from the pressure of it all. "I just hope I don't embarrass Dad," she said, her voice awrying that particular note of practiced vulnerability she knew my mother couldn't resist. "You know how much this means to him. The whole foundation board will be there. Everyone who matters. You'll be perfect, darling." My mother said, patting her knee. "You always are." I read out the window at the city lights blurring past. The Grand Astor was a fortress of old money elegance. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and a scent of expensive perfume that hung in the air like a threat. We walked in, and I felt the familiar wave of insecurity wash over me. The automatic urge to shrink into the background. To let Chloe and my parents soak up the spotlight while I hovered at the edges like an afterthought. But tonight I forced my spine straight. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, the stem cool and delicate between my fingers, and I stood slightly apart from my family, watching the room from the edges. It didn't take long. I saw them enter. Leo and his family. Leo Reuter, with his artfully tousled hair, and that smile that made you feel like the only person in the room. He was handsome, charming, and a master of the disarming compliment. In my past life I'd been utterly swept away by it, convinced that his attention meant something, that I was special. He greeted my parents with practiced ease, then immediately turned to Chloe. "You look stunning tonight," he said, his gaze lingering just a second too long on the curve of her neck. Chloe's cheeks flushed, a pretty pink that made her look even more radiant. "Oh Leo, you're too kind." "This old thing," she gestured to her dress, and for a fraction of a second, her hand brushed the spot where the zipper was undone. She didn't feel it. She was too busy basking in his attention. Her smile wide and genuine for the first time that evening. My mother and Richard were already deep in conversation with Leo's father, a real estate mogul with a booming laugh that echoed off the marble walls. A cluster of people gathered around the trio, drawn by the magnet of wealth and influence. I stayed right where I was, sipping my champagne. The golden liquid was dry and sharp on my tongue, a welcome distraction from the knot of anger and anticipation coiling in my stomach. And then it happened. Chloe turned to greet the foundation's president, a stately woman named Margaret Vance, who had the power to make or break careers with a single word. The movement was a little too quick, the fabric of her dress a little too tight. The exposed zipper, that 3-inch gap I'd noticed in the hallway, caught on the beaded edge of Mrs. Vance's evening bag. There was a sound like tea-ring silk. Chloe gasped, instinctively jerking away. The motion was a disaster. The zipper, instead of just being stuck, ripped downward, the metallic teeth screeching as they gave way. The back of her crimson dress sagged open, revealing the flimsy lace of her strapless bra, and the bas curve of her shoulder blades. A low, collective murmur rippled through the immediate vicinity. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Chloe's face went from pink to a deep, mortified crimson in the space of a heartbeat. Her hands flew behind her back, clutching at the fabric, but it was useless. The damage was done. The dress was ruined, hanging open like a half-peeled banana, exposing FAR more than any gala dress should. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes wild and panicked, root around the circle of faces. My mother clapped a hand over her mouth, her face pale. Richard's face was a thundercloud of suppressed rage, his jaw tight, his knuckles white where he gripped his champagne flute. Leo looked momentarily flustered, a flicker of something, disappointment, annoyance, crossing his handsome features before he schooled it back to concerned. But the damage was done. Everyone had seen what happened. Mrs. Vance asked, her voice crisp with disapproval. She was looking at the gaping back of the dress like it was a personal insult, a breach of etiquette that reflected poorly on the entire event. Chloe tried to laugh it off, a brittle, high-pitched sound that did nothing to dispel the tension. "It's nothing. Just a little wardrobe malfunction. Emma." She turned to me, her eyes desperate, pleading. "Emma, do you have a shawl, a jacket, something?" I met her gaze. I saw the shift in her eyes, the faint, calculating gleam that I'd become so intimately familiar with. She wasn't just asking for a shawl. She was asking me to jump in and save her, to rush over, wrap my arms around her, and guide her to the bathroom. playing the part of the selfless, protective stepsister. It was a performance we'd done 100 times before. Me the quiet fixer, her the damsel in a bit of harmless trouble. Except this time I wasn't moving. I don't have anything, I said. My voice was calm, flat, factual. I didn't even look away. Chloe's face fell. Her eyes flashed with something sharp and ugly before she remembered the audience. But you always, she asked to root, her voice cracking. I cut her off. I don't. The air around us seemed to freeze. People were openly steering now. Not just the immediate circle but people from other clusters who had turned at the sound of Chloe's riled gasp. I could hear the whispers rooting. The rustle of speculation and judgment. My mother looked at me with a mixture of shock and confusion. Emma honey, don't you have that little wrap, the one with the pearls? You brought it, didn't you? No mom, I said, my tone still perfectly level. I don't. I took another sip of my champagne. Leo stepped forward, a gallant knight in a tailored tuxedo. Here, Chloe, he said, shrugging off his jacket with an air of practiced chivalry. He moved to drape it around her shoulders, a protective gesture that would have made my heart melt a week ago. But this time, I saw the hesitation, the split-second flicker in his eyes. He didn't want to be the guy standing next to the girl whose dress just exploded. It was an inconvenience. And embarrassment. And he was covering for it. But the annoyance was there, beneath the surface. Lie concealed. Thank you, Leo, Chloe whimpered, clutching the jacket around her like a lifeline. But the damage was done. The jacket was a band-aid on a gaping wound. Everyone had seen. Everyone had heroed. Perhaps you'd like to use the ladies' lounge, Dr. Mrs. Vance said, her tone suggesting it was less of a suggestion, and more of a command to remove the offending spectacle from her immediate vicinity. Chloe's face crumpled. She gave a jerky nod and practically fled, her heels clicking a frantic, uneven rhythm on the marble floor. Leo's jacket trailed behind her like a defeated flag, dragging across the polished stone. My mother followed, her face a mask of distressed apology, her hands fluttering uselessly at her sides. Richard Rhodes stayed where he was, muttering something about these designers to Leo's father, trying to salvage the conversation with forced nonchalance. I watched them all scatter like birds from a gunshot. And when I looked at Leo, he was staring at the empty space where Chloe had been. There was no concern on his face now, no gallantry. Just a faint, irritable frown, the expression of a man who had been forced to play a role he hadn't signed up for. He turned, and his eyes found mine. For a long moment, he just looked at me. I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass, exposed and scrutinized. In the past, I would have wilted. I would have mumbled an apology on Chloe's behalf, made some excuse for her, tried to smooth things over with a self-deprecating joke. Instead, I lifted my glass in a small toast. Champagne's excellent tonight. Leo's frown deepened. What's gotten into you? I smiled, a small thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. Nothing. I'm just enjoying the Pa Rudy, and I meant it. For the first time in 3 years, I was finally enjoying myself. The encounter with Leo left a strange, hollow feeling in my chest. 3 years ago, that man had been the center of my universe. I had catered to his ego, his ambitions, his moods. I had believed every word that fell from his lips, especially the ones about how different I was from Chloe, how I was his real connection, how he saw something in me that no one else did. 2 weeks after this night, he would be in my kitchen, his hands splayed possessively across Chloe's lower back, his lips curved in that same self-satisfied smile while I stood frozen in the doorway, holding a grocery bag that had just slipped from my numb fingers. I pushed the thought away and focused on the present. The gala was still in full swing. The band was playing a jazzy rendition of some old standard I couldn't name, and the hum of conversations had swelled back to a comfortable roar. Chloe's wardrobe malfunction was already becoming just another piece of gossip to be dissected later, over flutes of Dom Perignon in the back rooms of wealthy townhouses. I knew I couldn't hide in my corner forever. The night was young, and there were things I needed to see. I drifted through the crowd, a ghost in black. I knew these people, their faces, their names, their petty allegiances. I'd spent years watching from the sidelines, absorbing the power dynamics, Leah renting who owed whom and who was sleeping with whose spouse. But tonight, I wasn't a spectator. I was a hunter, cataloging potential allies and enemies, storing away information for a future that had already happened once before. I was making my way toward the terrace when I felt a hand on my elbow. The grip was firm, almost proprietorial, the kind of touch that assumed ownership. Emma. I turned. It was Richard Sterling. No, that wasn't right. He wasn't my father. He was my stepsister's father, the man who had signed my mother's paychecks and acted like he was doing me a favor by letting me breathe the same air as his precious family. Richard. I said, the name feeling strange and formal on my tongue. Can I help you? His bushy eyebrows drew together, his face flushed from too much champagne. What the hell was that about? What about, Chloe? He hissed, his voice low and dangerously smooth. You just stood there. You let her humiliate herself. I held his gaze, refusing to look away. She did a perfectly good job humiliating herself, Richard. I didn't need to help her. He blinked, taken aback. I don't think anyone had spoken to him like that in his adult life. Certainly not the daughter who was too meek to ask for a second helping of dinner without apologizing for the inconvenience. Your mother and I have sacrificed a lot to bring you into this family, he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated with contained fury. The least you can do is show some fucking gratitude. Gratitude. I repeated, tasting the word. It was bitter on my tongue. For what, exactly? For the room that's smaller than the maid's, for the constant reminders that Chloe is the real daughter. And I'm just the righty case you tooken out of obligation, for the way you looked the other way when your precious daughter sta spreading rumors about me at school. Telling everyone I was unstable. That I had issues. Richard's face flushed a deep, ugly red. That's enough. Yes it is, I agreed. I pulled my arm free from his grasp with more force than I'd ever dared to use. Now if you'll excuse me, I need some air. I walked away, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't the fear I'd felt in the old timeline. It was something sharper, more visceral. Anger. Rs of suppressed rage, finally uncorked and flooding through my veins like fire. The terrace was blessedly quiet. The COL night air was a balm on my heated skin, raying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden below. The city spread out before us, a glittering expanse of lights, hiding all its secrets behind glass and steel. I heard footsteps behind me. Soft. Deliberate. Fancy meeting you out here. I didn't turn around. Hello, Leo. He leaned on the railing beside me, his presence a familiar, unwelcome weight. He was still handsome, of course. He always had been. The sharp jawline, the easy smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he thought he was being charming. But now I could see the cracks in the facade, the slight pettiness around his mouth, the calculating glint in his eyes that I'd mistaken for intelligence. Quite the show your stepsister put on, he said, offering a conspiratorial smile. Wasn't that a riot? I said dryly. He laughed, but it was a short, uncertain sound. He'd been expecting me to defend her, to tiptoe around the subject, to make excuses for her clumsiness. My nonchalance was throwing him off balance, and I could practically see him scrambling to recalibrate. You're different tonight, he said, studying me with that intensity he used to call interest, and I used to call love. What's changed? I turned to look at him directly, letting him see the coldness in my eyes. Maybe I just got tired of being the invisible one. He blinked. For a second, he looked completely thrown, like someone had just pulled the rug out from under him. Then he recovered, slipping back into the charming persona that had once been my undoing. He leaned a little closer, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. Invisible, Emma, you've never been invisible to me. Oh really? I arched an eyebrow. Then what am I, Leo? Yuri, he hesitated, his gaze dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second. It was a calculated move, one I'd seen him use on a dozen other women at various parties and events. It was meant to be seductive, intimate. It just made me feel tired. I think you're someone who's been hiding for too long, he finally said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. Someone who's finally ready to step into the light. It was a line. A cheap, scripted line that had probably worked on a dozen steroid girls. It had worked on me once too when I was too young and naive to know better. Is that so? I said. And what do you think I'll see when I step into the light? He smiled, A slow wolfish grin that I used to find devastating. A man who's always appreciated you. But not enough to put your jacket around me when my dress breaks, right? The words hung in the air. A slap he hadn't expected. His smile flickered, and I saw a flash of annoyance cross his features before he suppressed it. He opened his mouth, probably to spout another line, another excuse, another empty compliment to smooth things over. Low. The voice, high and brittle, cut through the night like shattered glass. Chloe. She had found her way out onto the terrace, presumably after extracting herself from Mrs. Vance's disapproving presence. She had clearly been crying, her mascara slightly smudged, her composure shot to pieces. She was still clutching Leo's jacket around her like a security blanket, her knuckles white. She looked at the two of us, standing too close together, and her eyes narrowed to slits. What are you two doing out here? Her voice dripped with suspicion, with the possessive territoriality of a woman who knew she was losing her grip on something she'd taken for granted. That Leo stepped back, a smooth, practiced motion that put distance between us. Just having a chat, Chloe. Are you okay? I'm fine, she said, her teeth clenched so tight I could see the muscles in her jaw working. She read at me. A look of pure venom that would have made me flinch a few days ago. She knew. She didn't know the truth, not yet, but she sensed a shift. The balance of power had changed, and she didn't like it one bit. I was just telling your sister how lovely you look tonight, Leo said, the lie sliding off his tongue like oil. Such a shame about your dress. Yes, Chloe said, her voice icy. A shame. She moved to Leo's side, slipping her arm through his in a possessive gesture that was almost comical in its transparency. She was marking her territory, staking her claim in front of the one person she'd always seen as her inferior. That I smiled at them both, a wide, genuine smile that I knew would confuse and irritate them. Well, I'll leave you two alone, I said. I'm sure you have a lot to discuss. I walked away without looking back, but I could feel their eyes on my back, two pairs of cold residential boring into me like daggers. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I had the first piece of my revenge in the palm of my hand. The dress, the humiliation, the public spectacle that would follow Chloe for months, maybe years. I had planted the seed. Now I just needed to watch it grow. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. I kept my distance from the main drama, drifting through the periphery like a shadow, collecting more pieces of information to file away for later. I overheard a conversation between two BOA RD members about Richa RD's shaky business dealings with a man I knew would later turn out to be an FBI informant. I noted the names, the dates, the subtle hints of panic beneath the polite small talk. I saw Chloe, still wrapped in Leo's jacket, trying to salvage the evening by clinging to the arm of a senator's son. Her laughter too loud, her smile too bright. It was pathetic, watching her scramble to maintain her social standing. But I felt no sympathy. Just a cold, clear satisfaction that settled in my chest like ice. On the drive back home, the tension in the car was palpable. The silence was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. My mother was silent, alternating between glancing at me in the REA review mirror and staring out the window at the passing streetlights. Richa RD's face was red from stone, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the armrest like he was trying to crush it. Chloe was slumped in the seat next to me, her arms crossed, radiating sullen fury that practically vibrated off her skin. When we got home, my mother pulled me aside as I was heading up the stairs. What was that, Emma? She asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. That was not you tonight. You stood there and watched Chloe humiliate herself. You didn't help her. What happened to you? I looked at her. This woman who had spent the last 3 years of my life, in the previous timeline, wringing her hands in hospital waiting rooms, praying for a miracle that never came. This woman who had chosen Richa Road over me, who had turned a blind eye to Chloe's cruelties because it was easier than rocking the boat. Mom, I said softly. What do you know about Chloe's scholarship? She blinked, confused by the non sequitur. Her scholarship, she won the Sterling Foundation ARTS grant. It was a very big deal. It was a gift, I said flatly, from Richa Road, to make her look good. And she's been using that grant to pay for things she shouldn't be buying. There's a bag, a Birkin, that I saw in her closet. It costs more than the grant itself, and she bought it last month in Paris. My mother's face went pale. Emma, that's a terrible thing to say. It's the truth, I said. I've seen the receipts. I can show you if you want. She read at me, her mouth slightly open, her eyes sea-urching my face for some sign of the daughter she thought she knew. In the old timeline, I'd stayed silent. I'd let Chloe get away with it all. Read of the consequences to speak up. But this time, I was done protecting her. Done being the invisible one. You need to go to bed, my mother finally said, her voice rely above a whisper. You're not yourself tonight. Get some rest, and we'll talk about this in the morning. I nodded, accepting the dismissal. I had sown a second seed. And this one, I knew, would take root faster than the first. My mother might pretend to ignore it now, but the doubt had been planted, and it would grow. I went to my room and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment while I caught my breath. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the streetlights outside filtering through the curtains. I sat on my bed and looked at my hands. They were perfectly steady. I thought about the hospital, the beeping, the smell of antiseptic that never quite washed out of your clothes, the way Leo had looked at me, like a stranger, a burden, a problem to be dealt with, the way Chloe had stood in the corner of the room, her face a mask of practiced grief that never quite reached her eyes. And then the cold, suffocating silence of the room after the machines finally went quiet. I reached for my phone. I knew Leo's number by heart. It was still in my contacts from before the accident, from a time when I thought he was the center of my world, the axis around which everything else revolved. I pulled up the message thread. The last message was from him, sent 2 days ago. Can't wait to see you tonight. X. I typed a new message. We need to talk. I hit send and I set the phone down on the nightstand. He would respond. He always did. He was too curious, too used to having me at his beck and call, too invested in maintaining his control over every woman in his orbit to let a mystery slide. He'd want to know what had changed, why the quiet stepsister had suddenly grown teeth. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. The night was far from over, but the pieces were in motion, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was the one in control. The ping of my phone woke me at 6 in the morning. It was Leo. His reply was predictably cryptic. Name the place. I'll be there. He didn't ask what I wanted. He didn't pretend to be worried or curious about my well-being. He was just curious enough to sacrifice a morning of his precious time to see what had gotten into the quiet stepsister. I could almost picture him, lounging in his designer pajamas, one eyebrow raised, a smug smile playing on his lips as he typed the message with one thumb. He thought he was walking into an easy victory, a chance to reel me back in with a few well-chosen words, and that infuriating smile. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a quick reply. Instead, I got dressed, had a long cold shower that did nothing to wash away the tension coiled in my shoulders, and steeled myself for what was coming. We met at a small cafe in Soho, a place far from the gilded circles of the Sterling Foundation. It was cramped, the air thick with the smell of roasted coffee and burnt sugar, the kind of place where nobody knew your name and nobody say red. Leo was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, his hair artfully disheveled, a perfect latte untouched in front of him, steam curling lazily to the ceiling. Emma, he said, rising to his feet like the gentleman he thought he was. I must admit, I was surprised to hear from you after last night. I sat down without waiting for an invitation, sliding into the chair across from him with a grace I hadn't known I possessed. I'm sure you were. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with that predatory gaze, like a cat sizing up a mouse. So, what's this about? I decided to be direct. There was no point in dancing around the subject, no benefit to playing the games he was so good at. I know about the Cholet ship. He blinked, the first crack in his fully constructed facade. The Cholet ship, the Sterling Foundation ARTS grant. I rified, my voice flat. The one you and Chloe used to fund her little shopping sprees. The one that's supposed to be for underprivileged artists, not for $10,000 or handbags and weekend trips to Paris. His smile didn't waver, but I saw the flicker of Allah RM in his eyes, the subtle tightening around his mouth. Emma, I don't know what you've heard, but that's nonsense. Complete nonsense. Is it? I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I'd found it in Chloe's room during the gala, tucked inside the pages of a fashion magazine like it was a bouquet RK. A receipt for a Birkin bag, purchased 3 weeks ago in Paris. The amount was enough to make my eyes water. Long after the grant had supposedly been our right, that I slid it across the table. Leo glanced at it, and his expression tightened. He didn't pick it up. He just read at it like it might bite him, his eyes fixed on the total at the bottom. This is a misunderstanding, he said, his voice strained. Is it? I repeated. Because I also have emails. Correspondence between you and the Foundation's financial officer. I'm sure the BOA RD would be very interested to see how their grant money is being misappropriated. His eyes snapped up to mine, sharp and calculating. Where did you get those? I smiled, a thin, cold expression that didn't reach my eyes. That's not important. What's important is what I'm going to do with them. For the first time, Leo looked genuinely unnerved. He leaned forward, RD, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the cha-rm completely gone. Emma, think about what you're doing. Your mother. Your family. You'd destroy all of that for a petty grudge. A petty grudge, I laughed, a ha-rsh. Empty sound that made the couple at the next table glance over. You broke my heart, Leo. You and Chloe. You made me feel like I was nothing, like I was just a placeholder until something better came along. But that's not what this is about. This is about what you're willing to sacrifice to protect your precious reputation. He read at me, his mind racing. I could practically see the HARS turning behind his eyes, the frantic calculations and reassessments. He was trying to find the angle, the weakness, the point of leverage. That was what Leo did. He found your soft spots and pressed until you broke. What do you want? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you to stay away from me, I said flatly, each word precise and deliberate. I want you to stop pretending we have anything. I want you to delete my number, forget my name, and act like I don't exist. And I want you to make sure Chloe knows that I'm not her doormat anymore. You want to protect your little arrangement with her, fine. But it comes at a price. I watched the war play out across his face. Pride. Self-preservation. The desperate need to maintain control over every situation, every person, every narrative. He was a coward, always had been. And a coward would always choose the path of least resistance, the one that protected his own skin. And if I agree, he said, his voice tight, then this receipt stays between us. I tapped the paper with my index finger. And I'll leave the rest of your secrets exactly where they are reburied. He was silent for a long, painful moment. The only sound the hiss of the espresso machine, and the low murmur of other conversations around us. Then slowly he nodded. Fine. You have a deal. I stood up, leaving the receipt on the table. He could keep it. I had copies. I wasn't stupid enough to trust him to keep his word, not when I knew exactly what kind of man he was. Enjoy your latte, I said. And I walked out, leaving him sitting in the corner of the cafe, nursing his bruised ego and his cold coffee, the receipt sitting between his fingers like a bomb he didn't know how to defuse. The victory was short-lived. I knew Chloe wouldn't let last night's humiliation slide. She was a master of the long game. A strategist in her own right, patient and ruthless when she wanted to be. It was just a matter of time before she launched her counterattack, and I knew it would come when I least expected it. It came sooner than I anticipated. That evening, I was in the kitchen, making myself a cup of tea, when the front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Chloe stormed in, her face flushed, her eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. She was no longer the fragile damsel in the gala dress, the victim of an unfortunate accident. She was a woman on a war path, and I was squa rely on her sights. You, she spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. What the hell did you do? I set down the kettle, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb with me, she screeched, her voice rising to a pitch that could shatter glass. Leo just broke up with me. He said he couldn't be with someone who was so reckless with money. And then he told me about the Cholet ship. He told me you threatened him. I kept my face calm, my expression neutral. I simply read some information with him, Chloe. You're the one who chose to misuse the grant money. That's not my fault. Her face contorted with fury, her fully constructed mask of sweetness crumbling into something raw and ugly. You're dead to me, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. Do you hear me? You're nothing. You've always been nothing. And I will destroy you. I will make your life a living hell. You'll try, I said, my voice a soft murmur. But you'll fail. She lunged at me, her hands outstretched, nails red like claws. I sidestepped neatly, and she stumbled into the counter, sending a cup clattering to the floor. It shattered on the tile, the pieces scattering like shards of a broken mirror. A perfect metaphor for everything that was falling apart around us. Chloe! My mother's voice rang out from the hallway. She rushed into the kitchen, her eyes wide with shock, her hand flying to her chest. What is going on here? Chloe whirled on her, tears streaming down her face, leaving tracks through her fully applied foundation. Mom, she's been sabotaging me. She ruined my dress, she stole my boyfriend. She's trying to destroy the family. She's been planning this for months. My mother looked between us, her expression a mix of confusion and alarm. Emma, is this true? No, I said calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. I asked Leo to step back. I told him the truth about the relationship. If Chloe feels threatened by the truth, that's her problem, not mine. My mother's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks like water from a sink. The relationship, she's lying. Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking. She's always been jealous of me. She's been poisoning Leo against me for months, whispering lies in his ear. She wants everything I have. That's not what happened, I said, my voice steady. You know it's not. The air was thick with tension, so heavy it was almost hard to breathe. My mother looked from Chloe's tear-streaked face to my calm, unyielding expression. I could see the doubt flickering in her eyes, the war between maternal instinct and the nagging voice of reason. In the past, she would have sided with Chloe without a second thought, too afraid of upsetting the delicate balance of our household. But this time, I had given her something she couldn't ignore, proof. I need to see the receipts, my mother said quietly. Chloe's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw a flash of pure panic in her eyes, the desperate scramble of a cornered animal. Mom, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, my mother cut her off, her voice suddenly hard, the steel beneath the softness finally showing. I know you've been spending money you shouldn't have. I know you've been using your father's name to get what you want. I've been blind, but I'm not stupid. The room fell silent. Even the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to pause. Chloe's composure shattered completely. She root sobbing loud, ugly cries that echoed off the tile walls, her shoulders shaking with the force of it. It's not fair. She's ruining everything. She's not even really your daughter. She's just some charity case we took in, and now she's trying to destroy us. That was the last straw. My mother's face went white, then red. Chloe, that is enough. Go to your room. Now. Chloe stared at her, stunned into silence for a moment. Then, with a final venomous jealousy at me that promised future retribution, she spun on her heel and stormed up the stairs, slamming her bedroom door so hard the pictures rattled on the walls. My mother turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears she was trying desperately to hold back. Emma, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to see. I thought if I just kept the peace everything would work out. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I didn't offer comfort. I couldn't. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep, the years of quiet suffering too raw to simply brush aside with a hug and a few kind words. I know, Mom, I said softly. But it's time we all stopped pretending. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The first wave of my revenge was complete. I had exposed Chloe's lies, planted the seeds of doubt in my mother's mind, and reclaimed a small piece of my dignity. I had made Leo squirm, and I had seen the fear in his eyes when he realized he wasn't in control anymore. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I had a phone call to make. A name to drop. A secret I'd been holding on to for years. A secret about Richard RD's business dealings that would bring the entire Sterling Empire crashing down around his ears. It was the nuclear option. The one I'd been saving for when I had nothing left to lose. But that was a battle for another day. For now, I let myself feel a small, fragile sense of peace. The nightmare was just beginning, but for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't running from it. I was walking tawa ardiet, head held high, ready to face whatever came next. Tomorrow, I would finish what I'd sta route that I didn't sleep that night. Sleep felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. A soft blanket I didn't deserve to wrap around myself. Instead, I lay in the dark, sta ring at the shadows on the ceiling, running through my mental checklist of everything I knew about Richard Road Sterling. It was a long list, built from years of watching and listening, of being invisible while the people around me forgot I existed. The bankruptcies he'd hidden. The shell companies he'd used to launder money through legitimate-looking fronts. The offshore accounts he'd opened in my mother's name without her knowledge or consent. The bribes he'd paid to city officials to look the other way while he cut corners on construction projects. The employees he'd fired without cause when they got too close to the truth. In the previous timeline, I had stumbled onto this information by accident. A stack of papers I'd found in his study while looking for a misplaced textbook, hidden behind a false panel in his desk. I'd kept quiet about it, naively believing that exposing him would destroy my mother, that she was too fragile to handle the truth. I was wrong. Richard Road Sterling was a parazit, and I was finally ready to cut him out of our lives for good. That by the time the first light of dawn crept through my curtains, pale and watery, I had a plan. It was ruthless, efficient, and perfectly legal. It would take time and patience, but I had both in abundance now. At 7 o'clock, I knocked on my mother's door. "We need to talk," I said through the wood. "Just us." She met me in the jardin, looking haggard and drawn. The confrontation with Chloe had taken its toll, leaving dark circles under her eyes and a tremor in her hands that hadn't been there before. But there was something else in her eyes too. A wariness. She knew I wasn't done, that there was more coming. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her everything, about Richard R.D.'s secret accounts, the fraudulent tax filings, the businesses he'd driven into the ground while claiming they were thriving. I gave her names, dates, and a list of offshore bank accounts I'd discovered, complete with account numbers and balances. "There's a reason he married you so quickly, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "He needed a front. Someone who looked clean, who could take the heat when the scrutiny came. That's you. That's always been you." My mother's face crumpled, the serifully constructed walls finally crumbling. She sat down heavily on the jardin bench, her hands clasped in her lap, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "He told me he loved me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He said I was the only one who understood him, the only one who saw who he really was." "He loves money," I said, sitting down beside her. "He loves power. And he loves Chloe, but only because she's a reflection of his own vanity. He's never loved anyone else. Not really." She was silent for a long time, the only sound the distant chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Then slowly, she lifted her head, and I saw something I'd never seen in her before. Steely resolve. A quiet, burning determination that reminded me of the woman she'd been before Richard Road, before the years of slow erosion. "What do we do?" she asked. "We go to the authorities," I said. "I have enough evidence to bury him. But you need to be ready, Mom. This is going to get ugly. People are going to talk. The press is going to have a field day. Chloe is going to blame us for everything." She nodded, her jaw set. "I'm ready." The process was messy. Messier than I'd anticipated. Richard Road was arrested 3 days later, pulled from a BOA RD meeting in his $1,000 suit and paraded out in handcuffs while his colleagues watched in stunned silence. The press was merciless, splashing his face across every front page and news channel. The Sterling Foundation collapsed overnight, its donors fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, its reputation in ruins. Chloe tried to play the victim. She gave tearful interviews to anyone who would listen, her face a mask of wounded innocence, claiming she had no idea what her father was doing. But the public wasn't buying it. Her reputation was in tatters, her name synonymous with scandal and greed, her carefully cultivated social circle evaporating around her like morning mist. That I watched it all from the sidelines, a spectator to my own masterpiece. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just watched and I waited. But the most surprising part was my mother. She didn't crumble under the weight of the scandal. She didn't retreat into shame or self-pity or the wa-rm embrace of denial. Instead, she sta root fighting back. She filed for divorce within the week, hired a ruthless lawyer who specialized in high-profile cases, and stripped Richa Road of every asset he'd hidden. Every dollar he'd stashed away. She found a strength I'd never known she possessed that it took months. But in the end, Richa Road Sterling was reduced to a cautionné retail. A man who had lost everything because he couldn't stop taking what wasn't his. He was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and money laundering, sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The house was sold. The CARS were repossessed. The foundation was dissolved. Chloe moved out at the end of the summer. She didn't say goodbye. She just packed her bags and left, her heels clicking one final time on the marbly floors of the house that had never truly been a home. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Los Angeles, trying to reinvent herself as an influencer, but the scandal followed her like a shadow. Every attempt at a fresh STA-RT was undermined by her last name. The legacy of her father's crimes that I didn't feel sad. I felt relieved that one evening. A few weeks after Chloe left, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. A habit I'd never been able to break. Emma. Leo's voice. I'd know it anywhere, even after everything that I didn't say anything for a moment. Just listen to the silence on the other end. I heard about Chloe, he said. His voice was somber, but I could hear the edge of curiosity beneath it, the unquenchable need to know everything. She's really gone off the deep end. Dropped out of college. STA route hanging out with some really questionable people. There are rumors she's gotten into drugs. That's not my concern. I said that. I know, he said, and there was something almost vulnerable in his voice, a note I'd never heard before. I just thought you should know. In case you were worried. I'm not. There was a pause, a long stretch of silence where I could hear him breathing on the other end. Then he said, Emma, I'm sorry. For everything. I treated you terribly. I used you, and I took you for granted, and I let Chloe manipulate me into hurting you. I was a coway road. I let the words hang in the air. They were nice words, the kind I had longed to hear in my previous life, the kind I'd stayed awake at night imagining. But now they felt empty, hollow, like echoes from a distant past that no longer had any hold on me. Goodbye, Leo, I said. And I hung up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. It was the same skyline I'd known my entire life, the same buildings, the same streets, the same lights. But it looked different tonight. Sharper, brighter, full of possibility in a way it never had before. I had survived the betrayal. I had dismantled the empire that had tried to crush me. I had found my voice and used it to tear down the walls that had been closing in around me. And somewhere along the way, I had found a version of myself I hadn't known existed. A woman who wasn't afraid to stand alone, who didn't need anyone's approval or validation. My mother found me at the window. She'd changed since the trial, since the divorce. There was a lightness to her step that hadn't been there before, a peace in her eyes that I'd never seen. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Better than okay. Good, she said, and she smiled. Because I've been thinking. We should sell this place. START over somewhere new. Somewhere that doesn't have so many memories. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw my mother as she truly was. Not the broken woman I'd grown up with. Not the victim of Richa RD's manipulations. Just a woman who had survived, who was finally ready to live. Where would we go? I asked. She shrugged. Anywhere. Everywhere. The world is wide, Emma. We just never had the courage to see it before. I smiled. A real smile that reached my eyes. I think I'd like that. We stood together at the window, mother and daughter, watching the city lights flicker and gleam. The future was uncertain, full of unknowns and challenges I couldn't even imagine yet. But for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready for whatever came next.